I made a challenge rule set to make Dwarf Fortress more intense, replayable, and just plain fun. But you don't need to be a master of the game or even know it to enjoy watching me struggle against the dice. It's inspired by nuzlocke, only letting you use the first Pokemon you find in each area, which naturally leads to playing to your few strengths while working around your many glaring shortcomings. I locked every dwarf to one skill to achieve something similar. The game tracks the 60 skills used to keep a fort running, from the pointless fish cleaning to the critical metal smelting, and normally, any dwarf can do any number of them. Go ahead, have that cook cut some gems and set some broken bones, if you don't mind the patient walking with a limp for the rest of their life. Not in a dwarf lock. Look, I'm not asking for points for creative naming. The Homeland's rights are crystal clear. Each dwarf can only work one skill they were already good at when they show up. If I need a weaponsmith after that lava incident, well, I might get nothing but cooks, exiled for medical malpractice, which means no new weapons. Multiply that by 60 skills, and you can see how I have to quickly adapt to what I have to survive without what I don't. To amp that up, I took max difficulty and then made it even harder by letting myself be attacked from day one with uncapped enemy raids, and I'm not using any traps or walling away any threats. No matter how terrifying whatever shows up to attack my dinky little fort is, it dies or I do. Let's see if I can build a fortress that at least stumbles on while most of the game is locked away from me. Or if this futile flailing only prolongs the collapse before my enemy's wretched might. The difficulties begin before the ship carrying the seeds of a new outpost even leave the safe harbors of their homeland and brave the frozen, evil continent ruled by savage goblins. Only 7 dwarves can set out as this foundation for what comes. And with no one knowing who will come next or what skills they might bring to the fort, these handpicked dwarves must excel at the most critical jobs. A miner will carve rooms and hew chunks of ore, a furnace operator can turn into metal bars, that a weaponsmith will then wrench into powerful forms that keep the fort safe and prosperous. A planter is going to grow crops that a cook and a brewer use to fill bellies and try to fill hearts. It still feels inadequate. Having just 2 more dwarves to unlock armor smithing, and then either the blacksmithing or masonry necessary to make some basic furniture would be amazing. But these 6 might just be able to handle enough work to scrape by. The 7th dwarf is a soldier named Bimble that the others will rely on to keep them safe. For this is a cursed expedition, and no one knows when the first threats will show up looking for blood. Skills get locked away before they can even settle into this snowy hellscape they call home when talking to each other, but not in their own hearts. Everything begins with the miner Kubik digging down and preparing enough space to tuck belongings away in. No one knows if the cawing crows overhead might be joined by a sneaky warlock's familiar spying on the newcomers, and the dwarves want to get inside. Just in case they're too late, and they've already been seen and marked for an attack, Bimble puts on the bronze armor they brought, what might be the only armor Covent Key has if no armor arrives and none come with a trading caravan, and sets about training at a makeshift barracks there in the entryway to make sure that nothing can sneak in past them. Kubik then digs deep past the caverns they open up. Also, metalworking can begin further below. Wood burning remains locked away, so the dwarves can't burn logs for charcoal to fuel furnaces. No, they need and deserve their birthright. The magma that calls to them from deep beneath the surface. That is what shall heat their forges and fuel their smelters. The metalworking quarter, planned just above that heartwarming heat, is admittedly ambitious, especially since the rest of the dwarves wander about above without any of their assigned work to do. They can haul and handle other small tasks that don't have any corresponding skill, but there's little work that actually helps the fortress at a time when it's critical. They would normally pick up a pick or work on basic stoneworking, preparing for the future, but instead are left to just wait. And inaction at a time like this lets the hesitation stewing in their hearts and filling their throats grow ever more rancid. A few take up their actual jobs when the completed furnace finally allows Cog to begin smelting precious ore down into metal bars that immediately enable Dewsum the weaponsmith to make bolts. They're not for firing at future threats, but instead are made to export, since bolts are one of the most efficient things to turn metal into for value, while also training the weaponsmith's skill. The uneasy peace that settles lasts another few weeks before the fortress's first migrants arrive. Let's go over what happens with each newcomer. Once the full migrant wave is on the map, each dwarf gets locked to one skill they have experience in, listed in this particular box, which is where all their basic labors are noted. If any of the skills there are locked, they have to be assigned to one of them. The bowyer and woodcutter have to do that no matter what, because it's the only skill, while Sarvesh has two, and could thus be chosen to be a stonecrafter, but is instead going to be an organizer, working as the fort's manager. If all of the skills listed there are already unlocked, they can be assigned to any of those skills so that there is a duplicate dwarf in case the original dies, or alternatively, they can be told to join the military. That means that even having the more useless skills unlocked, like a bowyer, isn't terrible, since the next bowyer can be drafted to defend Convent Key. Well, they could be drafted to defend the other forts in this video. I did say this was attempt number 1. For this is an evil land, and the melting snow lets a twisted ash wash over the newcomers mere moments after they were assigned their roles, their places, purposes never to be realized. Feb tells the others to hold their breaths, but inhales the corruption in doing so. It turns them into a fiendish merc zombie that turns and attacks the brethren he just tried to save. That useless bowyer managed to escape by fleeing to the fortress, but the others are caught and led to reap the benefits of undeath. Even more unfortunately, this challenge doesn't allow threats to be walled off or hidden away from, as you would normally do when facing something this severe. So, Bimble tries to go stop the threat once the ash settles, but zombies are ungodly strong. The inexperienced soldier is no match on her own. The zombies step over her corpse and head for Convent Key, snuffing out the newborn fortress in its infancy. The second fort is named Mirror Power and begins in more pleasant lands, since evil's terrifying weather just immediately ends a run when a fort can't hide away behind an airlock. The only change to the initial roster is replacing the soldier with a blacksmith. Convent Key never got to the point where it needed the basic goods and furniture made by a blacksmith or mason, but larger forts will, while the single soldier lost to bring them seemed inadequate for the threats faced either way. Investing in the future and letting migrants make up the army seems more prudent, and so the miner kicks off Mirror Power similarly to in Convent Key. Though the forging and metalworking district they provide for just above the magma sea is notably less ambitious, while more focus is instead paid to the start of living and working quarters for everyone else, so that they can begin contributing more quickly. The new blacksmith makes bins to help organize stockpiles, while the miner hews magnetite ore, which will be smelted down into iron, as well as the lignite and flux stones required for steel in time. Even though there are yet no soldiers that could actually use it to save them when the goblins inevitably come knocking. There is a slight issue with food, and specifically not having any of it because they didn't bring a soldier that would allow them to access the fertile soil in the caverns, but the 7 persist as flowers bloom in the throes of summer. There's little they can do but work at what their limited jobs allow and hope randomness will provide skilled hands soon. But fate is a fan of ironic cruelty. There were no blacksmiths in Convent Keys, but now that Mirror Power brought one at the expense of a good soldier, Cole, the legendary blacksmith, arrives. It's not the worst. They're an organizer, they can be a manager, still good. On to the net. Okay, what did I do to you, Tarn? A second legendary blacksmith immediately joins. 3 of the 9 dwarves in Mirror Power are blacksmiths. The Migrant waves also include a woodcutter and a second brewer. But overall, despite having 2 dwarves with S-tier skills, the batch is disappointing. It only really unlocked 1 useful skill until a carpenter comes that can take advantage of the woodcutting now here. The duplicate brewer Tobal is at least able to be drafted into the army, where they're given a mix of weapons made from prepared bars and the armor brought in the initial wagon. It's not much, but at least Mirror Power won't be totally helpless if a simple foe arrives. The plentiful iron veins around, though, do give them hope that they'll soon be clad in beautiful steel if ever an armorer arrives. Tobal's presence also means they can breach the cavern and harness the tantalizing soil within to help address food shortages, plus grow a variety of cash crops stockpiled in case some of those that can use them, like a thresher or miller, arrive anytime soon. It's a process started late enough that the pantries will wholly empty before crops are grown, but a trading caravan can bridge that gap. This does technically use the appraisal skill, which should be locked away, but I'm making an exception of it, because it's really useful for actually showing the value of items for recording, and because it's kind of a general stopgap to cover for a lack of skills. I am banning requesting specific items though. This adds another layer of chaotic randomness to what's brought. In this case, some food, armor, and clothes exchanged for silver bolts, which feels like it fits a dwarf lock enough to make the exception. The miner excavates the start of a huge temple that'll allow those here to gather for some solace and some camaraderie, though it isn't done before the second wave of migrants arrives. There's a useless fisher, a useless child, another child, yet more children. Did we volunteer to be an orphanage or something, unbeknownst to me? 9 dwarves come in total, but other than a second miner, which is pretty good, and that useless fisher who unlocks a skill that'll never be used, they were all children. These guys count towards a fort's population while being banned from all skilled work, so they don't really do anything in a dwarf lock. And even all those screaming, snotty kids don't stop Cog from beginning a new romance with Thicket the Brewer, though without a carpenter, there are no beds for them to actually add to the number of children in the fort. And apparently, dwarves will only sleep on wood, though the blacksmith is able to make other pieces of furniture like what's used to fill out a dining hall, even if someone had better tell Cog that his new flame thicket is dancing on a table there without him. I love Dwarf Fortress almost as much as goblins love dwarven children. Scouts of them saw the line headed to Mirror Power and sent thieves, all while the only soldier is down deep in the fortress's depths, securing it from the caverns. The manager Cole dies trying to keep children safe, continuing my personal curse of never having necromancers survive more than 4 picoseconds in any of my forts. And a couple of kids also die amidst the chaos because the goblins sent a black bear, a cheetah, and a lion into the fort to flush them out, apparently not realizing that dwarves make tasty snacks but pretty bad bar jokes. The beast tear through unarmored flesh until the soldier gets up there and ends the threat by cutting them down. Having to prepare tombs is bad enough when the sarcophagi made to fill them aren't child-sized to save on iron, and when there aren't more memorials for yet more children lost in the chaos, likely because they were kidnapped by those goblins. One of these surviving children even plays make-believe atop their friend's coffin and rotting body, while pretending this is all a nasty dream. God, I love Dwarf Fortress. Work continues, enabling the fort to better resist goblins in the future by mining out plenty of raw materials to throw into those magma-fueled fires, by farming crops that'll go into making needed booze or into stockpiling a bunch of barrels a thresher that might arrive in time can work through, and by comforting each other in the temples to enjoy those little moments of peace. Winter eventually fades, and spring brings an elven caravan the rules say can't be traded with, but they still do at least share tidings that the goblins' attack last year means that they are officially at war with mirror power, and may even send larger threats now. But they don't really need to. A Hydra, a ferocious beast that takes a master soldier, or a Disney song and a Greek god to subdue, arrives to terrorize a fort of just 17. This normally wouldn't hit a fort until there were 80-ish dwarves here, but remember, this place is being treated like it's massive from day one. A creature chases off the elves, which no one's gonna decry them for, but it's not gonna be sated by that skimpy appetizer. Tobal is only a competent soldier, and though they bravely charge in, all that accomplishes is a brave death. Massive claws rend through her weak armor, and the beast charges through and quickly starts slaughtering the rest. Onal gave birth to a lovely baby. That's so poorly timed. Hold on. You might be wondering why this is attempt number 5 when mirror power was attempt number 2. 3, we don't talk about 3. I think it's best to swap the weaponsmith to an armor and just bring a single steel weapon. That should be better for a single soldier. Wait, I made bolts. I don't have a weaponsmith, do I? Oh, fuck, I cheated. Attempt 4, I don't want to talk about it because I also accidentally cheated a couple hours in, but it is at least important for attempt 5, so fine. Before setting out for attempt 4, I actually looked through a bunch of old saves so I could compare the value made from an armorsmith versus a weaponsmith and see about cutting one for a blacksmith. Not having someone to make armor means terrible gear that's already let the first soldiers die in their early fights. Not having a weaponsmith actually only slightly worsens your first soldier, since bringing a steel weapon with the initial wagon is feasible, but a full set of steel gear is too expensive. Though it could preclude arming a larger group down the line if no migrants are weaponsmiths. And making armor is much worse for value, since bolts are about 3 times as efficient as the best piece of metal armor. Dwarves hate coming to a poor town, so you really want both an armorsmith and a weaponsmith. That's doable, but I also find out that even constructing things with stone technically uses the masonry skill and ignores the fact that it's locked away in the jobs list, meaning that I literally do not have a choice but to bring a mason or a blacksmith to unlock the ability to build workshops going into attempt number 5. Something has to be cut. There isn't much more to say about run number 4 itself. It started well, and the furnace operator prepared over 100 steel bars, all while giving the blacksmith enough metal to make steel bolts shown to traders. That in turn was enough wealth, and it attracted dozens of migrants, who unlocked lots of skills, including a few lucky finds, swelled the army up, and eventually led to a well-geared set of soldiers. It's an army that doesn't actually ever get challenged, because, and I didn't realize this until I hit 80 people after 2.5 years, I forgot to turn the difficulty back up, and it just sets itself to normal by default. No threats were allowed to arrive before this. Being able to safely build up makes it much easier. Too easy, in fact. And so, unfortunately, we are back to attempt number 5, which begins in goblin-infested and savage, though not outright evil lands with a familiar roster. the same miner and furnace operator will work alongside a blacksmith and armorer chosen to be brought, all of whom are complemented with a planter, brewer, and cook. The last three sound critical, but could actually be replaced. Dwarves can survive a surprisingly long time without food, as I found out in another video where I disallowed anything edible. And a lack of booze makes them sluggish and unhappy, but not dead. This handy chart that I'm using to show all this is great for YouTube, but in-game, it's all handled through work details. One contains all of the locked skills and gets basically every skill assigned to it right off the bat, then told that no one can do these. While the other work details each get one unlocked skill, the respective dwarves assigned, and then are set to only allow those assigned to practice it, even though it doesn't work perfectly. Tobal the Armorer does the blacksmith's job of building things out of metal bars brought in the initial wagon, even though they shouldn't be able to. But it is an unlocked skill, and I tried, so I'm not fretting about Tobal rebelling a tiny bit. I am fretting a lot more that the best way to make value out of metal with this set of skills is having a blacksmith make silver jugs, pots, and buckets. It's only about half as good as a weaponsmith would do with the same bars making silver bolts. Things progress largely as in the previous forts until those first migrants arrive, and randomness is not on the fort's side. Another miner isn't bad. It's one of the best skills to double up on because these guys do tend to get themselves killed fairly often. A Vukar, the potash maker, at least unlocks a skill so the next one can join the military. And of course, I get an armor smith I already have unlocked instead of that needed weaponsmith. The last new dwarf is a weaver who can make cloth, but only really when there's a thresher to provide them with thread, and that weaver is going to want a clothier to actually put that cloth to use. This set's inability to really be useful on their own is a great show of just how interconnected skills are in Dwarf Fortress, and how reliant dwarves are on having good friends to support them. This lack of new, useful skills means that the status quo is maintained, with slow but steady expansion, while a couple months of preparing the metalworking industry continues. The good work they do gives them great karma, and they get, by far, the best wave of migrants yet. It features a carpenter to make furniture, including beds, alongside a woodcutter to provide them with all the logs they need. There's a duo to handle cutting and setting gems found while mining out expansive space for ores, and even that very needed weaponsmith to help when more soldiers come. There's a splattering of other random jobs, and to boot, only a couple of kids. That only leaves masonry locked from the S-tier skills, which are those that are absolutely critical for a fort. This wave also unlocks some of the A-tier skills, which are those that are very strong but either need something else to pop off or just aren't absolutely critical. Think how herbalism, which lets you pick wild plants, is just a little bit worse at feeding crops into other jobs than planting is. The B-tier skills are those that are great with a few prerequisites, or nice to have but just not super useful. The subtypes of doctoring are great, but all of them require a diagnostician from the A-tier to actually be used. The C-tier skills are kind of weak overall, or only good with lots of unlocks. But dyer's a great example. That's a great profession to have for generating wealth and making your dwarves happy. But it needs a miller, a mechanic, a mason, a way to get cloth or leather to actually dye, and then a way to actually use that material for clothes for the actual dyer themselves to have any real value. And the F-tier skills are essentially useless. They don't do much even when you set them up properly, and really only serve to keep the army a tiny bit skimpier. Bowyers, for example, only make crossbows out of wood and bone instead of the metal you normally equip them with, which are made by weaponsmiths. figured ants channels the newfound energy that abounds into the start of a military filled out by some of the duplicates, as well as with space for economic buildings they hadn't bothered preparing for before this latest wave of newcomers unlocked so many options. Those that aren't handling important jobs reorganize the smelting area's stockpiles to make sure the critical workers there have to walk as little as possible and can instead focus on the needed work. Since no armor in the world can protect an entire army of dwarves if the furnace operator hasn't given them enough steel. That same abounding energy prompts the Faith of Ignition, who request a temple the miners switch to carving out in a corner nearby, though they'll also add a larger temple for general worship that helps everyone else come together as they please. There's no stonecutter about to smooth the walls, nor an engraver to beautify the place, but they'll find comfort in the company kept instead of the artwork about them. The smaller temple, meanwhile, is designated and given to the Faith of Ignition, and it is so very fitting that the only organized religion in a dwarflock worships chaos that Olan the herbalist embraces by just letting a few goblin thieves wander in. Though the fort's two soldiers, who are just starting to wear simple gear, do manage to cut them down without issue. It's kind of depressing that is, I think, the first attack all video that hasn't killed anyone, even though it's been like a half hour. Gems cut from the rough rocks miners cleared out are then inlaid in furniture to make it both nicer and more valuable, all as the first beds made in any of the attempts so far are worked from wood for use in a plain dorm room. That's little more than a serviceable stopgap till private bedrooms are more feasible. Steel production begins in earnest, so the weaponsmith and armorsmith can slowly start working on gear that'll keep the fort safe from the larger threats they will eventually face, even though there are only 2 soldiers that can model it for them now. All that consideration for the soldiers makes them move their barracks up to the surface, since they've been stuck in the depths while goblins hit the fort entrances a couple of times now. Which, of course, is precisely when carving the first private bedrooms into the walls near the caverns accidentally breach the dangerous ground and allow some of the little imp-like crundles roaming about there to break in. Though they're only able to cause some panic and a little bit of fleeing before the soldiers make their way down and paint the walls just as red as the creatures themselves. It wasn't a lapse in their protective watch, it's just a little jumpstart to their training. Another wave of the creatures come, not to try their luck any better, for the caverns echo with a terrifying roar that imparts a sudden realization. These crundles are not charging in aggressively, they're fleeing from the forgotten beast behind them. These creatures of yore can be fortress ending, and with only 2 soldiers, one is forced to stay and finish off the imps causing a ruckus, while the other heads up for the forgotten beast. Fortunately, though they're inexperienced, the hammer dwarf Zolban manages to crush a lucky blow and kill the thing before it causes any problems. It is a good thing that weaponsmith arrived to give them the armaments they needed to keep the promising hamlet as safe as it is. That leaves a lot of work cleaning the crundle corpses littering the hallways up, as well as dealing with a dead dwarf who went insane and starved themselves in the temple after their strange mood demanded rock blocks the fort just doesn't have the skill to provide. Those are normally some of the first thing a fort makes, but it's not a job anyone has here. Tombs are prepared for both them and for the future deaths, and these are nestled in on one side of the large general temple. The other side is reserved for a library set to be filled with gem-encrusted wooden bookcases. It is not the best use of the gleaming jewels, but it's better to invest them now than wait for a larger opportunity that may never come. And getting as many dwarves into figured ants as possible has to be the priority. since even basics like a trash chute above the lava need skills like a mechanic to be wired up so they can be used. In a dwarf lock, even something simple like having basic bedrooms feels great. It's rare and hard, even though normal forts do it within the first season or two. As plain as they are, that challenge in getting them makes them as beautiful as the sight of the blood of a goblin thief staining stairs into the fort. Copper is plentiful enough to allow Aerith the weaponsmith to begin honing their skill as one by mass-producing bolts from the somewhat mediocre metal. The sharp hammering fills the dwarf's hearts with pride as it echoes through the fort, where it would be distracting in the freshly decorated library above if the Mansion of Swords, a strange name for a library, actually had any books or scrolls to read. Though the pack animals above seem to have brought nothing but bins of leather and food, when instruments and things like rock blocks would be far more useful. Perhaps they even dream of making the dwarf lock even harder than anticipated. That doesn't stop a plethora of new rooms from being added into the winding caverns walls, with the little mini goal of giving every dwarf their own private bedroom, ensuring that the already overworked carpenter's jaw hits the floor. They're responsible for filling almost all of this, since the furnace operator that would give bars to a blacksmith for production here is instead making steel for an army. That mini goal feels so far off as this first real raid arrives. These normally wouldn't come until the fort boasted 100 dwarves or so, but reminder, the game's treating Figure Dance like a full-fledged metropolis. 10 goblins and a cave ogre are a tough fight for a fort of just 23, and yet the 2 dwarven soldiers are masters of their craft, so it just might be doable. Zolban's hands do sweat around their warhammer, but the unfortunate reality is that they still don't realize the worst of it. A lot more goblins follow, and their boots soon trample over the dirt as they charge forward. This cacophony of wretched intention is a result of uncapping raids. I thought the game would still scale them to the fort's wealth, but it seems to be working in discrete levels. Set yourself to be seen as the max level plus uncapped raids, and, well, this is too many for the smartest dwarf mind out there to even count. The soldiers fight valiantly, and they die warriors' deaths, notching a few kills, but that's the most they can hope for, as they are sent to the afterlife all the same, and Figure Dance is left to join them soon after. What a nasty, nasty dream that was. What kind of idiot wouldn't realize that letting the game treat you like a fully fledged endgame fort while also uncapping raid sizes would mean being attacked by almost 500 foes when your army is literally 2 dwarves. The game's reloaded to how it was a couple months ago, since Figure Dance is fairly far in, and the difficulty is instead turned down to the default hard mode, since a dwarf lock is already brutal enough, and Figure Dance still attracts way too many kids. The nasty dream is instead treated as a lofty goal. Grow to be big enough that they can take that fight straight up. Things largely repeat. The dream was pretty accurate. The library's name isn't as cool this time. The dwarves still start a few families with questionable methods, given the dorm room wasn't in 9 months ago. The first diversion from that alternate timeline in the dream is the Temple for the Faith of Ignition, which is recognized much earlier this time. The dwarves close out the summer building yet more bedrooms, and once the miners are done there, they move on to carving out space for a guild hall and for yet more tombs. Tombs the traders themselves might end up filling if they keep bringing such mediocre hauls. It's just more leather and more basic food, with no real explanation for why that is when they should be bringing a wide variety of useful goods the fort can't make. Autumn ticks by almost too quickly as miners switch from tombs to trying to avoid filling them when the goblin threats arrive, with the construction of a snaking tunnel through the ground connected to a break in the stairwell from the entrance down to the forts. It shouldn't impede civilians heading to the surface with trash or for trash trading deals, but it can be locked and used to force the goblins to take the long way around when they finally start arriving. It's finished with a nearby barracks filled with beds and sustenance, so that soldiers can recover near the front lines during their longer sieges. Even if what's prepared is a lot of space for the meager army now, that only dreams of boasting enough soldiers to match the massive goblin horde they saw in that premonition. More bedrooms are constantly made to house the kind of population that could boast an army that big, even if they're so garish without a stonecutter and engraver to pretty them up, and only filled as quickly as the lone carpenter can work. The temples could use love too, though they don't get it in at least this next wave of migrants. There's a useless fisher, a pretty useless miller, a child, a thresher that's pretty good, a few animal caretakers that should have taken care of something more useful, a couple butchers that didn't tell the animal caretakers what they do for work on the trip here, more useless fishers, and more useless children. Armok above. 40 dwarves came, but over half were children. The rest unlocked just 5 skills, of which only threshing is kinda useful for its role in processing plants into things like thread or cooking ingredients. Butchery could be useful if there were a tanner and bone carver to make use of the products, and the miller would be great with a mechanic that just isn't here yet. Without it, they can't actually build the workshop to do any milling. This was about as disappointing as could be from such a large group, but then that does average out with the fantastic last wave of migrants, so it's hard to complain too much. The saving grace is that all those duplicate skills mean the military can triple in size. That's a really nice way of saying they're just adding a few more to the already small force. None have experience with weapons yet, but the forges heat up to prepare gear for them. There's a few that actually have some skills as hunters or marks dwarves, but the fort has no way to make quivers yet, so they'll instead learn to use swords, even if the crossbows that are right now better in their hands would be much better against the fire-breathing forgotten beast charging into the waterlogged caverns. The soldiers training in the depths rush up towards it, but the creature Ohid Tobsimo Iquab manages to kill a miner wrenching tetrahedrite from the walls before it's struck down by Odom the Spear Dwarf. After baptizing his weapon in the Beast of Legend's blood, he names it Umazabir Ibrukdural, after the renowned hunter who guarded ancient dwarves' ancestors back in the Age of Myths. You never want to have a miner filling a tomb, but they at least were the backup to Vutok, and so the skill is still usable throughout the fort. The metalworking that continues enabling helps keep the dwarves safe from goblin intruders, who now send 6 of their own against 6 soldiers who quite literally rise up to meet them. Civilians are caught on the surface, where they force the soldiers to leave that new defensive hallway nearby, but though the newcomers don't have much experience under their belts yet, their steel armor still shrugs off goblin weapons all the same, while the original 2 soldiers handle the bloody work of crushing and stabbing through what goblin smiths call armor until the day is won. That enables the miner to begin a new project, an economic hub with a few hallways for offices just past a large area with central storage and a plethora of cubbies about it to fit various workshops. This is more forward-proofing than anything, since the only unlocked skill that's yet to actually have the needed workshop is a loom to turn thread made by that thresher at the farming workshop below into cloth that'll admittedly sit around being stocked up until a clothier arrives to make the garments the fort needs. Perhaps that can change. Perhaps the armor diligently preparing by mass-producing iron shields to hone their skills could have someone to provide for. Unfortunately, after a couple of fairly useless adults arrive, it's just child, 8 in a row. The other few adults among the newcomers do fill out the first military squad, giving the Oars of Circling a full 10 members, which isn't the worst. It's not quite enough to drain the metal bar stockpile, and that is actually kind of a bad thing. Figure Dance would love to sport fewer children and more soldiers, or even just dwarves that are more useful in the mission. Though the game's difficulty settings were changed after that nasty dream, the game is still going to attack Figure Dance like a mighty fort of 80 when it's really a meager town of 40 with another 40 whiny mouths to feed. I've seriously never seen a ratio this bad. At most, it's like 10% kids instead of literally half. So when Zungo, the gigantic finch, a forgotten beast who shoots webs good at pinning down melee soldiers so they're helpless and easy targets, comes against a fort that has to scrounge up quivers from dead goblins, well, the children are more targets than anything. The soldiers do run into danger in the cavern to try and help, and they manage to ambush the creature there. They get atop it and cut it down before webs can incapacitate them, but it still slaughters a child before it dies. It's not a great outcome. But, then again, there were just some pretty good points raised about having too many children. The corpses of the forgotten beasts that seem to enjoy terrorizing the fort aren't valuable in the traditional sense. But the Faith of Ignition chooses to embrace the chaos of Figure Dance that they worship by requesting to proudly display the beast's corpses amidst the steel bolts as a sign of what Figure Dance has withstood. It's not the only thing the fort has to continue withstanding. Traders refuse to offer more than bits of leather and skimpy foodstuffs. The visiting merchant Astesh must not be bringing anything good like raw materials Figure Dance can't yet make, because they've got a running bet back home that the fort will collapse, just like they have a running bet that this channel won't hit 35,000 subs before the year's end here. It's going to be close. So if you enjoy the channel and my videos, make sure you check to ensure you're subscribed so that you get to see more just like this. The fort really should be getting more from the traders. It's an important enough place that it draws a dwarf that considers themselves a commander despite boasting only middling soldier skills and not having any kind of experience with leadership or tactics. Compare that to Zolban, Figure Dance's militia commander, the legendary fighter, who would make that commander's legs quake like a newborn fawn with but a single blow. That skill and the glimmers of renown built by the efforts here help draw 16 new migrants, while almost all of the furniture made over the last year is put into brand new bedrooms to provide for everyone. Most of the newcomers are assigned to the military to join Zolban, their hero, since the wave itself consisted of just a few children, an absolutely useless vermin tracker, and then duplicates and unwanted skills like animal caretaking. The new squad they form is the Honor of Roofs, and begins training in the caverns to hone their skills so that they can fight alongside the growing hero when the goblin threats arrive. After the smiths work down near the magma to get them gear, of course, it's the largest order ever placed, and almost enough to use up all of the fruits from the furnace operator's hard work. There is a beast of yore named Damso Belrakok that unintentionally tries taking advantage of these half-geared soldiers by attacking soon after, but the thing is made of gemstones that easily crack under the weight of the oars of Circling's heavy blows. The Faith of Ignition once more goes up to drag the corpse back down, past soldiers sharing cheer about both their swelling numbers and their growing accomplishments. Though there are only 20 of them for now, they'll form the backbone of the dwarven might used to battle back against the world's larger goblin foes in the coming decade. A mere fraction of that threat arrives as if to remind the newcomers of what they've been training for. The 20 goblins and a single cave ogre that show are but a glimmer of the real deal, but they are by no means a meager force, especially since those newer soldiers are still only half equipped. These goblins are at least willing to wait though, so long as Figure Dance tells them that the time is spent deciding whether or not to capitulate to the undwarven demand to buy safety with a desperate tribute instead of crushing them beneath cold metal. Zolban spends the time to forge his work equipping those last soldiers, designating a burrow throughout the lower levels of the fortress that tell all of the civilians assigned to it that they should stop leaving to wander above and play at the pond. Once they get the memo to head inside, and at least a few more sets of steel gear are made though, the creatures are provoked, and the day chosen to live in the dwarves' memories in infamous glory. The goblins find a lone soldier to the south who's far from home for some reason. The rest of the dwarven soldiers had been waiting in the winding tunnel below to ambush the goblins, but are forced to change it up and try to save their sister in arms. They do catch most of the goblins near the fort's entrance, and though this is the largest force they've faced yet, they cull the enemy's numbers well. Gear and leadership win them the day, and though they don't manage to save the lone soldier in the southern wilds, the military's victory is otherwise perfect. A chance for an even cleaner triumph arrives in the form of an emaciated, web-shooting forgotten beast that's also a blob of water, although it unfortunately does kill a kid splashing about the puddles near the cavern before the soldiers can get to it and finish it off. A death per threat isn't too bad, though having enough skilled soldiers to patrol both of the caverns below, as well as the world above, so foes could be caught before they catch civilians, would be really great. But as it is, the soldiers are stretched too thin, and these almost flawless victories can't hope to last. The third attack this month comes in the form of a cave dragon that ambushes civilians in the caverns and kills 5 there before soldiers even arrive. Its teeth ravage an experienced sword dwarf, cutting through their steel and killing him there on the spot. And though the dragon dies soon after, a newer soldier bleeds out from their injuries soon after. The sound of a hammer beating silver into a sarcophagus is heavy and ominous as it echoes through the fort's halls. No one likes having to evaluate who died and who's still amongst those here, but it has to be done. And while no critical jobs were lost, a few of the less important ones are locked once more. Weaving was only barely used, and bowmaking wasn't going to be, so the only real effect of these losses is leaving the army a little smaller. It's bad, but recoverable, hopefully. Most of the soldiers left do now have their full sets of gear, but their numbers are on the low side thanks to the Dwarf Locks challenge and the absolute glut of children. Even the threats they can handle, like fire imps, manage to leave infernos that ravage crop fields before the things are killed, giving the dwarves plenty of time in which fear grows in their hearts while they helplessly watch fires rage. Morale even starts dipping down between that and the 10 deaths they've suffered this season alone. The losses cause a child driven mad by grief to go berserk, necessitating a depressing culling. There are plenty of injured still lingering at the sites of battle all around, and though they can't be treated because medical skills are still all locked, they can at least be dragged to safety by designating Ost the Broker as the chief medical dwarf. That doesn't actually use skills, but it allows a hospital to be chosen near the caverns and tells the other civilians to haul the injured to beds there, where they'll linger. An ex-soldier without legs that needs a crutch to walk can't even be given one until a diagnostician with the skill confirms they, don't have legs. They're probably just waiting for their health insurance to approve everything, but since there's no better system, they'll just wait there as the disastrous year comes to an end. It's hoped that that is all great motivations to make the soldiers train just a little bit harder. Spring's arrival comes with a late Christmas gift request from the Faith of Ignition for their temple to be upgraded with a staggering 30,000 dwarf bucks worth of stuff. That has to be handled with mass-produced steel bolts, hosted at dozens of pedestals, since though this would normally be addressed by letting them display an artifact, the fort has none, apart from family heirlooms and soldiers' named weapons that can't be used. A couple of dwarves have tried making artifacts over the years, as Asmol, the fort's only blacksmith, does here trying to helpfully demonstrate. But while they're great to see in most fortresses, they're terrible in a dwarf law. Artifacts are incredibly valuable items that dwarves sometimes choose to make randomly, but they want them made out of a random assortment of goods and insist on those specifically regardless of availability. And with skills locked off, those items often can't be made. The rock blocks Asmo wants require a stonecutter the fort just doesn't have. So Asmo will patiently wait while refusing to do their other blacksmithing work until they get what they asked for. And if they can't make what their heart desires in some half a year, they're going to go insane and die, relocking one of the fort's most important skills. The other forge continues working so that mass-produced weapons can be proudly displayed in the religious temple, which isn't the least bit concerning, and finally upgrade it to a proper complex. That economical accomplishment, as well as the need to find new training methods so the soldiers are better faster, convince Figure Dance that it is finally time to look abroad at the goblin threats. The creatures seem content in fairly medium-sized towns of about 50 each, splattered to the southeast, so even the less experienced Honor of Roofs should be able to handle these fairly small groups decently, thanks to the strong steel they wear, all as they gain combat skills from the live training. It's not something to look forward to exactly, but Izum the captain marches out hopefully all the same. It leaves the better soldiers in the Oars of Circling home, where they handle forgotten beasts like the flying, fire-breathing crab that fills the caverns with an ominous buzz. Fortunately, Rakust is able to jump up and slash the thing to pieces before it can actually hurt anyone. They name their sword after the sound the beast made with its dying breath. Look, Rakust just isn't really the artistic type. The soldiers abroad did pretty well too. Their trip took a couple weeks, mostly organizing everyone and getting them to leave Figure Dance, but they killed about a dozen goblins amidst the skirmish, while growing far better with their gear. Izum the captain gained about a whole level in each of their combat stats from fighting one goblin, all without anyone suffering any losses, when that same training would take a couple months of drilling back home. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said when they return and find goblins ready for them. They sent messengers and got fresh faces that came to help from other nearby towns, and so while the day is won, the inexperienced Captain Izum dies for it. Zolban decides to assign one of her own from the squad she's personally trained to help lead the newcomers so that they will still have a powerhouse to make up for their slowly dwindling numbers. The debate on whether to head back out and try again is immediately interrupted by terrible news that the blacksmith's sanity just finally slipped from them without the chance to touch rock blocks even once. Not the same. The blacksmith will die before long, And this already relocks a skill so important that the expedition assigned one of its initial 7 dwarves to it. It's gonna be really painfully ironic if the new group of migrants that come soon after had the stonecutter that Zolban literally died for. There's a lot of other stuff the fort could benefit from. Another blacksmith or mason so that the carpenter isn't responsible for all furniture. A diagnostician to unlock medicine, and then the subclasses like a surgeon or wound dresser to make use of them. A leatherworker or clothier to make the fort's first clothes and replace the tattered garments that are starting to accumulate. A mechanic and a mason would unlock so many other jobs in the C tier. Instead, after 30 children and adults with useless jobs like animal caretaking arrive, there's finally a wound dresser that's useless until a diagnostician comes, and a leather worker, the only other highlight of the group. More skills are unlocked, but they're shearing, pottery, and soaping, which are okay at best, are still locked behind a lack of masonry and mechanics. Some of the other newcomers have to be put into jobs that lost their worker, even in useless skills like making bows, but the rest are recruited to remake and refill out the squads. It's great that the military is ticking up and now has 20 soldiers, but that's still a pretty small force for a fort of 120, even discounting the lack of critical workers to do things like masonry or blacksmithing. More than that, other important jobs like furnace workers don't have enough bodies. The single furnace operator that came when Figure Dance was founded has been working almost full-time making steel since then, but everything they've accumulated is used up. So now, even if a bunch of good soldiers, or more animal caretakers drafted into service come, they could only be slowly geared, 1 or 2 a month at max. And dark times linger far too near for the dwarves' taste. That new leatherworker gets a crafting station to actually start using what's been stockpiled from years of trading. The preparation of a kiln for the potter near the magma unfortunately leads a miner to stand in the worst possible space and immediately immolate themselves. Fortunately, miners are common enough that there is still a duplicate who can then prepare a space to gather clay and feed the kiln that's made over their friend's corpse. Unfortunately, that one miner bears news of a goblin attack when they flee back down the stairs. They sent 20 foes last time, but now the goblins bring over 40 mounted soldiers to attack what seems like a huge dwarven city of 120, but really boast only 2 squads of soldiers and are fairly poorly prepared despite their best efforts. Their gear is fine, but most began training very late. Zolban goes to tell the goblins that the only peace they'll find here are their last thoughts of a home they never return to if they decide to attack. Soldiers settle into the barracks near the winding tunnel and wait there in nervous anticipation as the sounds of dozens of yapping bark dogs and ferocious howls descending the stairs grow louder, closer. There's a little mix-up with the newcomers not being assigned to the burrow and not realizing that running towards the goblins is probably a bad idea. But the civilians are more at home in the tunnels and flee back past the friends they don't bother warning about without any actual confrontations with the goblins. And the wretches are finally close enough that retreating through the dark, narrow halls would be a daunting task. Dwarven might unveils itself. The enemies are split and overwhelmed. Warhammers splatter the walls with broken goblin bones, while swords send blood-laden limbs arcing up and thumping into the ground. Spears stab through their mounts in a gritty and grindy affair. But in the end, Zolban's words were a true promise, not an empty threat. The goblins at the back are allowed to flee without being pursued by soldiers that instead turned their attention to marking the wounded. No dwarves died, a resounding success, though 3 did receive some grievous injuries that partially dampened the cheers. No one can tell if that lopped off leg is really so bad without a formal diagnostician, and so the soldiers are all given honorable discharges that are solemn affairs, even though the dwarves instead want to be loud and boisterous as they cheer about leaving the corpses of 50 goblins and their wretched animals to rot in the halls as a warning to the thieves that will next try to pilfer away Figuredance's children. Children that seem to want to go insane here. A child is struck by a fey mood that would have them make an artifact like the blacksmith did before. But unlike that crafter and the others before them who died asking for goods that couldn't be provided, the child asks for things that all can be given. However, this still isn't good news. She wants to do some stone crafting, which would be a new skill and would be incredibly useful. But the rules of the run are pretty specific. Dwarves can only be locked into a skill they have experience in, which, because she's a child and doesn't have experience in anything, well, my one exception was trading, so technically, she has to be allowed to go mad. Look, no one ever said that Figuredance was a good orphanage. Perhaps that news is what helps stop the flood of children in the next migrant wave. Of the 16 that come, most are adults with a wide range of talents. There are 8 new unlocked skills, including some good ones. There's a surgeon to help in the hospital, a manager to oversee work orders, a metal crafter to make some fancy artful pieces, a stone cutter who will smooth walls and make rock blocks that could have saved Asmo the blacksmith, and even a diagnostician to finally start working the hospital like a hospital. It is a tremendous set of unlocks, though there still are a few missing key skills. Beyond the obvious masonry and mechanics, papermaking would be amazing to feed into a library that still hasn't really been used since no traders bring anything to write on or books to buy. Though that would require a quern made by a mason to actually give the papermaker the intermediate they need to do anything. At least smoothing stone can finally begin. A wild thing to say 3 years into a fort, when it's normally something handled by hordes of underemployed civilians even early on, but boy does this meager progress feel great. As nice as smooth walls are, the injured soldiers still resting in the hospital are probably a little bit happier that healthcare has started through the forts. The diagnostician and surgeon who have arrived can treat some of them, though there's still no one to dress wounds or stitch up their injuries just yet. That means they're not going to be in fighting shape anytime soon, so they're replaced with the last of the Migrant Wave's dwarves. There are enough to necessitate a third squad for the last couple of soldiers, a wonderful accomplishment, and Dewsum the manager gets the fort's first office to start helping with that. It's placed near the economic hub, and is where he'll oversee work orders to give the soldiers what they need. Eventually, the forges have finally run through Datan's excellent work producing steel over the last 4 years. And for the first time, there isn't enough for all the soldiers. The new manager, though, knows how to solve that. They quickly get to work helping by yelling at Datan to do it right, then micromanaging their workflow without actually doing much to help directly. Quivers covered in rot and miasma are looted from the goblin-killing tunnel so that Zolban can manage a Marksdwarf squad out of future migrants. Now that steel's in short supply, but armor from metal that's easier to produce would be fine for soldiers that shouldn't be on the front lines anyways. Archers are also great for dealing with the almost seasonally stream of forgotten beasts that arrive to meet their end here. In better news, copper bars that are still plentiful thanks to the massive tetrahedrite ore have been used to train Aerith the weaponsmith up to the point where their work will soon be legendary. The leftover copper bars, for the furnace only makes steel and iron now, are turned into rings by the new metal crafter, who will hopefully do something for the dwarves' dour moods. Being able to own something simple might help, and it's not like there are many other options. With no mechanic for a mist generator, only a single carpenter to make cheap furniture for everyone, only the lone leatherworker to replace everyone's damaged clothes, and so on, their avenues are pretty grim. The lone miner begins doing an amazing job working on the deepest layout of intricate bedrooms nestled against the cavern's natural walls that anyone has ever seen, even if there isn't enough furniture for all of them to actually be used just yet, thanks to the carpenter's busy schedule. All that work's done while traders share stories about the brutal goblin attacks that have kept the fortress stagnant for so long. Figuredance's traders even not so subtly joke/hint that they might pay the traders a bribe if a mason happens to arrive next season. Or at least tell the homeland to stop sending kids. They don't exactly live their best lives here, especially since the hospital some end up in for a while is fairly far from the soldiers training below, but not that far from the forgotten beasts in the caverns that fly in and rampage nearby before soldiers can get their stumpy little legs up the stairs to stop more deaths beyond the child and fish cleaner it claims. If 2 dwarves are going to die, those are about as good a targets as could be chosen. But it's still a future fish cleaner migrant that has to do that instead of something useful, actually serving Figuredance. Empty bedrooms and a long list of work make the carpenter beg the potter to try and help them with basic furniture, as autumn's wind-blown leaves above are marked by a late but welcomed migrant wave. After a few useless civilians pass, a second diagnostician arrives, because of course, I only get these 2 waves in a row oh so late. They did at least bring some medical assistance that could dress wounds or suture injuries, though. One of those 2 could also be the mechanic the fort's been dying for, instead of the doctor they've been dying without. Why couldn't it be any of the others that were a mechanic? Dwarven engineering would unlock some very useful quality of life and a few other kind of important jobs, but the only way to fill out the hospital is to overlook that. And with so many injured children there, mechanics will have to wait a little bit longer. Figuredance is a bad orphanage, but even dwarves have limits. That small wave does push the fort up above 140 dwarves, which would normally make a fort a metropolis, the highest rank you can have. But your rank also correlates to a place's economy, and Figuredance isn't just 1 rank below that shining metropolis, but 3. A town of just 80 is supposed to have a better economy than this. The constraints imposed by a skill lock are brutal for the economy. No stoneworking can be done. Few miners means little gem work, there aren't many crafters at all. Even the fully staffed hospital can't do everything because they lack the traction bench required to treat some injuries, thanks to the lack of a mechanic who's needed to make mechanisms for one. It isn't like much can be done to fix it either. The military is instead expanded, with those that can do little to make Figuredance a metropolis now, including the army's first archers, wielding quivers sourced from the goblins to help fight those twisted creatures that'll inevitably come to recover them. It does feel a little unnecessary though. I mean, the military's been shaping up well. The limited range of crafters that can even give the dwarves bedrooms definitely feels like much more of an issue than the army that killed the last goblin force without filling a single coffin. The mediocre economy is soon made even worse when the legendary weaponsmith that just reached the rank finds themselves in a strange mood that needs rock blocks, which, full disclosure, I could make. I didn't, because at the time I thought I needed a mason and not the stonecutter currently working smoothing common areas, because I was looking at an old version of the game's wiki. But I maybe let them go a little insane in my ignorance. Oopsies. The overworked carpenter gets more added to their docket in the form of crutches requested by the doctors above, though that is at least something nice. It means Figuredance finally has proper healthcare beginning. And that's in inverse to steel production, which is still so slow that the armor requested for the last wave of soldiers has barely progressed right as goblins arrive to test what's there. More goblins. Ugh, ever more. 48 mounted soldiers came last time, but the survivors that fled that got their friends, and a huge force floods in from the edge of the world. There are 120 of them. One of the largest goblin armies ever seen, most of whom are mounted on beak dogs, plus 20 ogres and a cave dragon. totaling a force of 250 some, who set their wretched sights here. 6 full steel-clad squads would quake in front of this foe, but unlike the last gigantic army that attacked Figure Dance, this one's not arriving in a dream. Zilban once more tells the goblins they'll find no peace here but death, but even her normally stalwart voice shakes. And so the foes, undeterred, pour into the tunnels designed to separate them. But there are actually too many for it to really thin them out. Dozens lie on each tile, and to make things worse, the dragon tears through the wooden door and lets them avoid the long walk around. It's so rude of these guests not to show any respect. The soldiers come to that breach, but the head of the second squad dies almost immediately, despite being one of the first soldiers drafted in Figure Dance. The others try as they can and wield what might they have, but it is paltry, and they're ganged up on by a force 10 times their superior. Soldiers are surrounded, and even the best can't hope to wither that. The terrifying sounds of their deaths ring down to the civilians below. And bad as that is, the eventual silence is far worse. The soldiers fought valiantly, but every last one of them is killed before they can even take a third of the goblins out in turn. That actually is enough to technically end the siege, and some of the goblins with weaker wills call it quits. But some that were here when their last force was decimated are more determined. Driven by spite and a bloodlust only their beastly kind could harbor, they push down towards dwarves caught in the midst of work preparing tombs for soldiers they knew would not all return. But none of them dreamed that no one would. Instead, goblins come, where they corner civilians in the temples and guild halls and slaughter them. The library's lack of books are stained with blood, and the meager crafting areas of Figure Dance, so incomplete that this problem was allowed to rise in the first place, are left with nothing but corpses and the dead dreams they dared harbor. Okay, that was so fun. I am really curious why Figure Dance got so many children and what happened to the homeland to cause that. But some missing education about the bedroom aside, having to carefully consider what to do with each dwarf and how to best tackle problems was super fun and nerve-wracking in the best way. I've included the image I used to track skills throughout the video in the comments, so check it out and give the run a try yourself. Then let me know how you enjoyed doing it down there. Give me any feedback too. I might try this again with some changed rules. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like it and subscribe so you see my next one focused on surviving exponentially larger enemy raids when I don't have to lock my skills.